Most people didn't look at Chester Bennington and see addiction. He didn't look like the stereotype. He was charismatic, magnetic, and fronting one of the biggest rock bands on earth. But behind that energy was a history few could imagine. Chester once said, "Most people don't connect me or Linkin Park with alcoholism or drug addiction, but that's been part of my life since I was a kid." His voice carried pain long before the world ever heard it. Behind the platinum records and the screaming crowds was a boy who never felt safe. Chester's story didn't begin with fame, it began with trauma. The kind of trauma that reshapes your soul before you even understand what's happening. He was 7 when it started. An older male friend began abusing him. Too young to fight back, too afraid to speak. He kept it secret for years, terrified that no one would believe him. Later, he admitted, "I felt broken before I ever had the chance to grow up." At 11, his parents divorced. His mother moved away, and Chester stayed with his father, a police detective who specialized in child abuse cases. But the irony was cruel. His father was never home, and when he was, he didn't talk much. Chester spent most days alone, trapped in silence. The pain he carried had nowhere to go. By his teenage years, that silence had turned into anger. He started experimenting with drugs, cocaine, meth, LSD, anything to quiet the noise in his head. He once said, "I'd sit in a room, smoke, drink, and party just to distract myself from the pain." It was a cycle that felt like escape, but led nowhere. At school, things weren't easier. He was small, sensitive, often bullied. He learned early how cruel kids could be to someone who didn't fit in. But the same pain that made him feel weak also became his fuel. He started drawing, writing, and singing. Music became the one place he could be honest. "Music was the only thing keeping me together," he said once. He wasn't exaggerating. Each lyric, each scream, was a way to release what words alone couldn't carry. In that chaos, he found direction. By the late 90s, Chester had turned his survival mechanism into a dream. He joined several local bands, playing small shows, sleeping on floors, living off adrenaline and hope. Then came a call that would change his life, an invitation to audition for a young band in California. They were looking for a frontman. The group's name was Linkin Park. At first, nothing about it seemed special. Just another unsigned rock band mixing genres, still figuring out their sound. But when Chester walked into the studio and started singing, everything shifted. His voice, raw, unpolished, full of emotion, transformed their demos instantly. Within months, the chemistry was undeniable. Chester's haunting voice fused with Mike Shinoda's rapping and electronic textures. It wasn't just rock or rap, it was something entirely new. When they sent out demos, labels didn't know what to call it, but the fans who heard it felt it. By the time Hybrid Theory dropped in 2000, Linkin Park was ready for the world. The album exploded, selling over 27 million copies worldwide and becoming one of the best-selling debuts in music history. Songs like "In the End," "Crawling," and "One Step Closer" became anthems for a generation that didn't know how to express its pain. Critics called it teen angst, but fans knew it was more than that. Chester's voice wasn't performance, it was confession. It cracked, screamed, and whispered with the kind of honesty that people rarely hear in music. On stage, he gave everything. Every ounce of breath, every emotion he'd been forced to bury as a child. Off stage, he was falling apart. Fame didn't heal the wounds. It just made the silence louder. In a 2002 interview, he said, "Everything I ever wanted was right in front of me, and I didn't feel anything." That emptiness, that invisible weight, never really left. Linkin Park was touring relentlessly, sometimes more than 300 shows a year. Fans saw a star. His bandmates saw a man trying to keep his demons under control. The drugs were mostly gone, but alcohol had taken their place. Chester smiled for cameras by day and drank himself numb by night. Even as the band worked on their next album, his inner world was collapsing. Every new success only reminded him that happiness still felt out of reach. The boy who once sang to survive was now trying to survive the dream he built. And soon, the pressure would start to break through the music itself. By 2003, Linkin Park were unstoppable. Their debut had turned pain into power, and the pressure to follow it up was crushing. Chester Bennington was everywhere: magazine covers, award shows, stadium stages, but inside, he was unraveling. The band poured themselves into their second album, Meteora, and the process nearly broke him. Every lyric he wrote came from the same wound he'd been trying to close since childhood. The sessions were intense, sleepless, and emotional. When the album finally dropped, it went straight to #1, selling more than 800,000 copies in its first week. Songs like Somewhere I Belong, Faint, and Numb captured the storm inside him. The guilt, the anger, the constant feeling that nothing was ever enough. To fans, Meteora was perfect. To Chester, it was therapy, a scream disguised as art. The fame that looked like salvation was starting to feel like a trap. He once said, "I could be standing on stage singing to thousands of people and still feel completely alone." Touring didn't help. 300 shows a year, airports, hotels, cameras, every city blurred into the next. He smiled through exhaustion, hid behind humor, and drank to quiet the thoughts that wouldn't stop. The harder he tried to escape his pain, the louder it got. Then in 2004, Jay-Z called. The idea was bold, a mashup of hip-hop and rock, a bridge between worlds. The project, Collision Course, gave Chester and the band a new spark. When Numb/Encore hit radio, it became a cultural moment, a perfect fusion of two artists who both understood what it meant to fight for identity. The track stayed on the charts for months and earned them a Grammy. On the surface, everything was golden. But when the lights went out, Chester was still haunted. In interviews, he spoke openly about addiction, acid, meth, cocaine, alcohol, and how each had once offered him relief that never lasted. He admitted he'd taken up to 11 hits of acid a day during his worst years, though he'd left the hard drugs behind. Alcohol remained his quiet poison. He said crawling wasn't about blaming anyone, it was about hating himself. By 2006, the cracks reached his home life. His first marriage was collapsing, and depression pushed him to the edge. His bandmates staged an intervention, confronting him about his drinking and self-destruction. It was a moment of truth. Chester later said, "I realized I was two people, the Chester everyone loved and the Chester I hated. I didn't want to be that person anymore." Rehab gave him a brief calm, and out of that calm came a new beginning. In 2007, the band released Minutes to Midnight, a record that sounded like rebirth. The raw aggression of the early years was replaced with reflection. The guitars softened, the lyrics grew vulnerable. Songs like What I've Done, Bleed It Out, and Leave Out All the Rest showed a man confronting his demons instead of running from them. The album sold over 600,000 copies in its first week. Some fans missed the rage, others felt the honesty. Chester didn't care about the debate. For him, it was the first time he'd written from a place of awareness, not survival. But peace is fragile. As the band kept pushing boundaries with 1,000 Suns in 2010, a dense, experimental album about fear, faith, and control, Chester's inner fight returned. The drugs were gone, but the depression never really left. He told one interviewer, "I'm fine until I'm not. It's like the light switch flips, and I don't know why." From Living Things in 2012 to The Hunting Party in 2014, the group kept evolving, balancing innovation with nostalgia. To the outside world, they were still conquering charts. To Chester, it was getting harder to breathe. Years of touring had shredded his voice and drained his spirit. Each night, he screamed words about pain he still felt. By the time they began working on One More Light, everything about Chester seemed softer. His tone, his presence, even his smile. The songs were melodic, emotional, almost fragile. They felt like messages left behind for the people he loved. When asked how he was doing during interviews, he'd laugh and say, "I'm good." But those closest to him could see it, the exhaustion, the emptiness that kept coming back no matter how hard he fought. He had built a career on turning pain into beauty, but carrying that much pain, night after night, year after year, was starting to cost him everything. And soon, the loss of a friend would reopen every wound, he'd ever tried to heal. May 18th, 2017. News breaks that Chris Cornell, the legendary voice of Soundgarden and Audioslave, has died by suicide. For millions, it's a shock. For Chester Bennington, it's something else entirely, a wound that cuts deeper than words. The two men shared more than friendship. They were bonded by struggle, addiction, depression, and the quiet war that lives behind fame. Chester often said Chris felt like a brother, one of the few people who truly understood him. When he performed at Chris's funeral, he sang Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. His voice cracked halfway through, trembling under the weight of grief. A few days later, he posted an open letter. "I can't imagine a world without you. I pray you find peace in the next life." No one knew it yet, but those words sounded like a goodbye, not just to Chris, but to himself. 2 months later, on July 20th, the day that would have been Chris Cornell's birthday, Chester Bennington was found dead in his California home. He was 41. The news hit like an earthquake. Fans who had grown up with his music, who had survived heartbreak, addiction, and loneliness because of his words, suddenly felt the world collapse. The man who had given their pain a voice could no longer bear his own. Within hours, vigils appeared in cities across the world: Los Angeles, Berlin, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. Crowds gathered with candles, posters, and speakers playing Numb, in the end, Crawling. Some sang, some cried, some just stood in silence, trying to understand how the man who had saved so many lives couldn't save his own. For Linkin Park, it was unbearable. The band went quiet. No statements, no interviews, just grief. Their tribute concert months later at the Hollywood Bowl became one of the most emotional nights in modern music history. Artists from every genre, pop, rock, hip-hop, came to honor him. When the crowd sang in the end without Chester's voice, it was haunting. You could hear thousands of people crying and still singing, as if trying to keep his spirit alive through sound. In the months that followed, the conversation changed. For years, rock music had romanticized pain, addiction, rage, rebellion. But Chester's death forced everyone to confront the truth. Pain isn't poetic when it kills you. His story pushed mental health to the front of the conversation, in a way no public campaign ever had. His lyrics suddenly hit differently. "I tried so hard and got so far, but in the end, it doesn't even matter." Fans replayed those words and realized they weren't metaphors, they were cries for help. The loss of Chester left a silence that still hasn't healed. But from that silence came awareness. Artists began speaking openly about therapy, trauma, and recovery. What had once been taboo was now a movement. Chester didn't start it, but his honesty gave it a face. Years later, Linkin Park introduced a new singer, Kai Stewart, to carry the band into its next era. Fans were divided, some curious, others angry, all still grieving. But even as the band evolved, one truth remained: Chester couldn't be replaced. His voice wasn't just sound, it was emotion in its purest form, a bridge between rage and tenderness. More than a musician, he became a symbol of empathy. For every teenager who ever felt unseen, for every adult who carried invisible wounds, for everyone who needed to know that pain could coexist with purpose. He left behind his wife, his 6 children, and a world forever changed by his honesty. Years have passed, but Chester's voice still echoes on playlists, in stadiums, in headphones on long nights. His story reminds us that behind every loud performance, there can be quiet suffering. That fame doesn't erase pain, it only hides it. He once said, "I don't want to be someone else. I just want to be myself." And that's what made him unforgettable. He was human. Flawed, fragile, brave. He gave everything he had to his art, until there was nothing left to give. And even now, long after the music fades, his legacy endures, not just in records or awards, but in the millions of people who learned, through his voice, that they weren't alone. Because for them, Chester Bennington wasn't just the sound of a generation. He was the proof that even the broken can still shine.